Hey everyone, so this week we're going to move on to the diurnal birds that we have here at the Raptor Center, which are going to start off with the hawks. So diurnal means active during the day and asleep at night. So last week we talked about the nocturnal raptors that we have. Mostly people think about the owls. This week though, we're going to concentrate on the diurnal raptors, starting off with the red-shouldered hawk. So this is our red-shouldered hawk. Now, red-shouldered hawks are kind of like the daytime shift of the barred owl. So the owl that we talked about on Wednesday last week that likes to live in wetland habitats, the red-shouldered hawk is kind of the daytime equivalent. They like to live in all those wetland habitats, catching all those frogs, crayfish, wetland water snakes, salamanders. They'll catch a wide variety of items, but they really like those wetland water animals. Now, if you look really carefully at this bird, you might be able to recognize that she has a really small eye on one side. She has her fully developed eye on one, but then on the other side, that eye just never fully developed. So it's still there. She still has it, but it just never fully developed. Now, we can't release raptors with partial eyesight. For raptors to be able to survive in the wild, they need to be almost 100%. They just simply can't be 95% and survive. And so she'll have to live with us the rest of her life, because in the wild, if she tried to catch something, she'd miss it by just a little bit. But it only takes so many days by missing your food by a little bit before you start starving. And so she'll live with us. She's got all day to find her food, and she usually finds it pretty well, but of course it's not running away from her. In the wild, her food will be moving away from her, and so she'd have a much harder time trying to find her food in the wild. Now, they get that name red-shouldered hawk because right over here on their shoulders, they kind of have reddish coloration. Now, that's really actually their wrist. When they're standing like this, that's actually their wrist that they've kind of got tucked in where it looks like their shoulder. But they're called red-shouldered hawks. Now, like I said, you can find them in those wetland habitats. We have them very commonly around here. We've got a little creek that runs behind our facilities, and we can hear these birds lots of times. They make a really loud, distinct call. Now, I made the barred owl call. I can do that one, but that's about the only raptor call I can make. So I'm not even going to try and imitate the red-shouldered hawk call. Sometimes blue jays and mockingbirds will imitate these birds, though. And so just because you learn what the red-shouldered hawk sounds like doesn't necessarily mean that the noise you're hearing is actually from a red-shouldered hawk. These birds, like I said, they're common all over the place around here in those wetland habitats. You can see she's kind of puffing up. They can control their feathers independently. So just like that eastern screech owl that we talked about, they can raise their tufts, they can lower their tufts. You know, all these birds can control their feathers on their body independently. So you saw when I moved a little bit, she kind of puffed up her feathers, made her look really big and mean. And then kind of once I kneeled back down, she kind of slimmed down a little bit. She knows that I'm not a threat to her. Red-shouldered hawks are commonly seen in neighborhoods. We'll get people sending us photos lots of times of them being in their backyard or maybe around their pool. So they are commonly seen in neighborhoods. So keep your eyes out for these birds. They're going to be all around. Remember what they sound like. Go ahead, Google what they sound like, learn that call, and then you might be able to find them a little bit easier. But of course, you might also end up finding a blue jay like I have several times. These birds, they are very common in those wetland habitats, living in all those areas where they're going to be able to catch those frogs, things like that. So the red-shouldered hawk. Now, these birds are mostly found in the eastern U.S. There is a very small population on the west coast, but in areas like Colorado, the western side of Texas, you're not going to see the red-shouldered hawk. They also are a migratory species. Here in Alabama, we'll see them pretty much year-round, but further north in the eastern part of the U.S., they are going to migrate a little bit further south in the winter. Now, birds migrate for food resources, not really due to that cold weather. Like we talked about with the barn owl, these birds can handle pretty much any cold weather temperature, but they need to have easy access to food. and so they'll migrate further south where it's easier to find their food, which again is lots of those wetland animals, but also lots of the rodents, mice, things like that. These birds are going to be catching and eating every day. And so these birds do a great job making sure that there aren't too many of those rodents and wetland animals and all sorts of things in our neighborhoods and around the communities. Now, I just put up our red-shouldered hawk. I got to wait on her before I put her up, and she weighed 584 grams, which is a little bit under 1.3 pounds. So they're not heavy at all. Again, we talked about last week that these birds aren't going to be carrying off your dogs, your cats. They're just not that strong. That's a fairly average size for a red-shouldered hawk, 1.3 pounds. And so they're kind of a medium on the little bit smaller side of the hawks. We're going to stick with the diurnal birds this week. Tomorrow we're going to keep talking about some other types of hawks that you can see here in Alabama. Thanks for tuning in. War Eagle.